Hello, and welcome to this introduction on data types and variables in Python. There are many different data types in Python. The four that we're going to be focusing on today is integers, float, string, and Boolean. And the order we're going to be going in is first you'll be talking about int and float, and then we will going into strings, and then Boolean. So in this order. So now to start, just to introduce data types and variables, variables hold information. It holds information in memory. Now, this can be different types of information, which we'll get into later, but that's pretty much the basic idea of variables. Likewise, in math, the variable for, say, x can hold any value. With a similar idea in Python, if you have a variable, this can hold any type of value that could be of any different data type. Variables are of the most important aspects of coding in Python and any other language as well. Understanding these concepts is fundamental for coding in any language. So before we get into different data types of variables, I just want to leave some quick points about variables in general. So a variable name can be any combination of letters and numbers that is not already a keyword in Python. On top of that, a good practice in Python is to use camel casing for your variable. So if I had a variable that had two words, for example, if I were to have a variable first name, and then we can make this a string, which we'll get into later, this is not a good coding practice since it is all lowercase. These are two words we can use wherever there may be a space, which we are not allowed in variable names. We can use a capital for the next word, and we can use a capital for every word after that. So this is called camel casing, and it's a very good coding practice. It basically just means that every word after the first word, you would capitalize the first letter. We are also allowed to use underscores in variable names. This is commonly used in variables that are held as constants. What constants is a variable that you want to just have throughout your entire code that you do not change. So for example, max values. This would be a common notation for a constant, which we could just do any number, like 40. This is also an integer that we'll get into later, but you can also use underscores in your variable names, which can take up where a space may be. It is also a very important coding practice to have meaningful variable names. And what I mean is that you want them to be the reader that is reading your code to be able to understand what the variables are. So instead of just using like letters as your variable names, like if I were to make this into like I and this into J, the actual function of them would be really hard to understand for the reader. So it's also a very good coding practice to have meaningful variable names that actually relate to what their use is towards your code. Another important aspect of variables is, so we have the variable I here, which we can just name to name. So we have name, which is assigned to head. So now, if we were to do name equals foot, this is called variable reassignment. So what we're doing here is we're redeclaring this name variable to a different value. So over here, if we were to print name, I just want you to quickly pause the video and guess whether it would print head or head foot or foot head. Just quickly guess what you think the code will output. So now if we run the code, we can see that it's foot because you can redeclare variables later on in your code to change what the value stored in them is. So the latest one we have here is foot, so name is now equal to the value foot. So the stored value in name changes from head to foot. So to begin, we'll be talking about integer and float. Now these two are very similar with one difference. Integer is any numerical value without a decimal. For example, we can say 34. So this variable, var, is of type integer, holding the value 34. So now we can print this variable, and when we run this code, it'll show 34 in our terminal because that's what this holds, and it's an integer value. A float value is like an integer, except it's a decimal value. So if we do 34.1, or any decimal for that matter, it'll be of the type float. So we can print var2, and it'll show 34.1. So these are two different types, which you have to remember. A float and an integer, although they are very similar, if there's a decimal, it means it's a float, and if not, it means it's an integer. So to prove that var is of type integer and var2 is of type float, we can use the type keyword. So we can print type of var. And likewise, we can do print type var2. So what this should show us that var is an integer, and this should show us that var2 is a float. So as we can see, we have class int for 31 and class float for 34.1. And what integer and float allows us to do is we can perform arithmetic operations, that being we can add, subtract, divide, and multiply. There are other types like modulus and floor division that are also very useful that we won't get into. But just for the basics, we'll perform some arithmetic operations on variables of type integer and float as examples. So if we have var and var2, we can do var3 equals var plus var2. So now we have var3, which is the addition of these. So 34 plus 34.1. Now the answer to this would be 68.1. And I would like you to guess, just pause and guess, would this var3 be of type int or float? And what we can do is print type var3. And we can also print the result, var3. So you should have your guesses, and we can run this code. And we get 68.1, and if you guessed correctly, it would be a float. Why? Because 68.1 contains a decimal. So in Python, if you add integers to decimals, if the result is a decimal, Python will automatically cast the resultant variable to be of type float if there is a decimal. Otherwise, if not, if we were to make these two both integers, if you were to have 34 and 35, and then run the code again, we would get 69, and it would become an integer because there is no decimal. So we can also, within a single variable, we can add or subtract. So we can do below this, we can do var4 equals 33 plus 64. And that'll give us an integer value of the resultant of 33 and 64. You can try to print that on your own and also print the type, and you should get integer. But you can also do other options. You can do 64 divided by 8. You can do it. This is how you divide. You can also do subtraction. We can do 40 minus 30. That should give us 10 of also type integer. And you can also multiply using the asterisk. So we can do 30 times 6. And this should give us whatever the resultant is of 30 times 6. And these also work as well for float types. And an important thing to remember is if your results, if the answer has a decimal in it, it will be of type float. If not, otherwise it'll be of type integer. So all these examples are type integer, but if we were to use decimal for either of these numbers, the resultant would be a float. So that's a brief introduction to floats and integers. And now we will move on to string. So now moving on to string, this is a data type for handling text in Python. So to create a string, you'll just use the same variable name. We can use var. And we can make this, make sure it is wrapped in quotation marks. And this can be anything. It can be a letter, number, anything. As long as it's wrapped in the quotation marks, it would be a string. So what we can do is this is a test string. So now we have a test string here that is wrapped in quotations. And to prove, we can also print this, and we can also print the type that this is, just to prove that it is in fact a string. So now if you were to run this code, it would say this is a test string, which is what our string is, and it is of type string. So strings are highly useful for displaying text in Python and also manipulating text as well. There are also many operations and methods that you can put forward towards a string in Python. A few examples, we can do print var dot upper. So what this would do is it would turn this entire string into uppercase. So if we were to run this, we would get the entire case in uppercase. Sorry, the entire string in uppercase. Likewise, we can do lower, and take a quick guess what this would do is we can get the entire string in lowercase. And I will link down below a website that has a bunch of different string operations that you can perform. That can be very useful in your code if you want to manipulate a string. There's also string indicing. So each character, including the white spaces in this string, has this numerical value assigned to it that starts from 0. So the T would be 0, the H would be 1, the I would be 2, the S would be 3, the space would be 4, and so on towards the end of the string. So if you want to get a specific, per se, character of this string, you can do var. And then if we want to get the I, we would count 0, 1, 2. So this I would be 2. So if we were to do var 2, get the index number 2 of this string, and we want to run this code, we get the letter I. Indexing is also very important for lists, which we will get to in another video, but for now, this is just the examples for strings. And now beyond that, you can also splice strings. You can make a substring from a string. So if we have this is a test string, and we want to go from and we want to turn this into is a test string, then we can start from this value and end at the end value. So this would be the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4th index to the end of the string. So what you would do is, just to let you know, it would be your start position and then a colon and then your end position, although these would be numbers for indexes. So we said that this is the 4th index, and if you're going to the end of the string, you do not have to input a value for your end index. So it would just be 4 to the end of the string. So now if we were to run this, we get is a test string, and what it does is it includes the 4th index, but if you were to add a final index, for example, if you want to go from 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, so if you want to go from 4 to 8, it would include everything except for the A. So now if we were to run this, we get is, and the 8th one is not included. It's everything up to but not including the last one, but does include the first one. So this is a basic introduction to splicing your strings. There's also string concatenation. So what we can do is, in this variable, we can actually add 2 strings together. So I can do plus, and this is what we add. So now we can actually add these 2 strings together using the plus operator, and what it will do is it will create one long string with this entire input. So now if we were to just print this, we don't have to print the type, we already know it's a string, and we run this, we can see this is a test string, and this is what we add because we've concatenated strings. And what we can do as well is we can have this is string 1. We can make that into a variable. We can have another variable called var3, which is this is string 2. And we can actually, because these are both of type string, we can add var2 and var3 together, and it would be the same as if we were to do this is string 1 plus this is string 2. So now if you make var4 equal to var2 plus var3, it would say this is string 1, this is string 2. So now if we were to print var4, it would say this is string 1, this is string 2. And notice how there is no space after the 1 or before the 2, so it doesn't include a space here. So this is basic string concatenation, which is also very useful when you want to combine strings together. So that is a basic introduction to strings in Python. Again, I will list down below a website that has a bunch of different string operations that will also make more sense once we get to Booleans that you can use in your code. So the last data type we'll be covering in this video is Boolean. Booleans are maybe the simplest, but also one of the most important data types in all of coding. So for a Boolean, we can have a variable here, and we can just do true. So basically, a Boolean can be one of 2 values. It can either be true or false. So if we were to set variable equal to true, we can print var and print type of var like we've done previously. So now if we were to run this code, we would get true because var is in fact true, and we would also get class bool because it is a Boolean. Likewise, we can make this false, and we can run the same code, and you can see we get false, and it's also of class Boolean. So what Boolean allows us to do is it's really useful for comparisons as well as conditionals. So we'll get more in depth into conditional statements in a later video, but for now, just a brief introduction in order to help you further understand what a Boolean is. I'm just going to do a quick little code using a conditional to show you what it would be, whether it's true or false. So if we had var equals to true, we can do an if statement here. So if var, you could do equals true. It's also case sensitive. We could print hi, and else, so if var is not true, aka if var is false, we can print by. So now what we hear is we have if var equals true, If var is true, we'll print hi, otherwise we'll print by. So what I want you guys to do is pause the video now and just give a quick guess of whether we'll print hi or by the first time running this code. So if you guess correctly, we print hi because var is in fact true. Now you may see we have a little underline here because if something is true, instead of doing if var equals true, what we can just do is if var. And this basically just means if var is true. And if you want to do false, we could do if not var. So now if we do this, I want you guys to guess whether it'll print hi or by. So if it's not var, so which means if it's var is not true, we'll print hi. Otherwise, if var is true, we'll print by. So what we get is by because var is true. So if this basically means if var is false, we'll print hi, and if var is true, we'll print by. So now we can change this into false, and I want you guys to guess what it would run now. So if we were to run the code, we get hi because var is false. So not var means var is false, which means we get hi. And if we were to do if var, now I want you guys to guess again whether we'll get hi or by. So we get by because var is false, so it's not var, so it would not print this. Instead, it would print by. Conditionals are also very useful when it comes to comparisons. Now, comparisons we'll also get to in a later video, but for now, I'm just going to also give you a quick introduction to a comparison just to help us understand further what a Boolean is. So we can have two integers. We'll just do int1 equals 33 and int2 equals 44. So what we can do is print int2 is greater than int1. So I just want you guys to guess what would this print? Would it print an integer value? Would it print true? Would it print false? Would it be a Boolean? Just think about it in your head before we run this code. So now that we run this code, you can see that we get true because integer 2 is a greater number than integer 1. So this statement is true, so we get true. And this you can also use in your conditional statements, which we'll dive deeper into a later video. But for now, this just shows you that you can also use certain statements like comparison statements with these operators to get a Boolean value of true or false, which is very useful in your conditional statements. So that is just a brief introduction to variable types in Python. I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you guys do have any questions, please let me know down in the comments below. Again, I will link any useful websites that I find could be useful for further understanding this content, and I will see you guys in the next tutorial.